Tom, thank you so much for your time today. This is Tom Bannard from Virginia Commonwealth University, and he is answering our 10, maybe 11 questions on the recovery support services that he has available at his university. So if we could just start with, could you just give us an overview of what the recovery support services look like at Virginia Commonwealth?
Absolutely. So I'm the assistant director for substance use and recovery support here. And I'm a person in long-term recovery. So that means for me that I got into recovery actually kind of between my first attempt at undergrad and my second attempt at undergrad. So I was pretty young. I was 22. And one of the things that was really helpful for me, that was very uncommon, was that when I went back to school, the school I went to had a collegiate recovery program. So I was one of less than 10 schools in the country at that point in 2007 that had a program. So that was, kind of an early influence for me. And then I kind of worked in the community doing substance use and recovery support for almost a decade before coming over to VCU. VCU, I think we're one of the larger collegiate recovery programs in the country. What that looks like is typically in any given semester, we serve, somewhere between 120 and 130 students, and kind of a range of programs. All of our services are voluntary, so we don't do any mandated care. We typically serve students that have that are either struggling with or in recovery from severe substance use disorder. So the vast majority of our students, more than 90%, really more than 95%, might meet criteria for a severe substance use disorder. So this is not like, hey, I was having a little trouble here and there, or had a bad night. This is typically students that have had some sustained issues with their substance use. And again, voluntary services. So folks can kind of opt in at the level that they want and feel like they need services. So it's a tiered system. We have a number of recovery meetings on campus, usually somewhere around 12 to 13 a week, in terms of just open recovery meetings on campus. These are open meetings to the public. There's probably another 80 or so recovery meetings, mostly 12-step, that are in walking distance. So our students typically do a combination of recovery meetings that are on our campus and off campus. So those are open to the public. And so there's a nice mix there with students in recovery who tend to be earlier in recovery, usually first 5 years of their recovery journeys, with just other community members. And so that brings a lot more kind of length and stability of recovery into our community. So we really love being a host of recovery meetings, and it also helps students really create some durability of their recovery. Like they are used to going to meetings that are not just other college students when they leave the university. So that's a nice piece. And then kind of increasing kind of level of expectations as our services go up. So only students can be members of our community, and that means outside of recovery meetings, only students can use our space. We have about just over 3,000 square feet clubhouse space on campus. That is just the collegiate recovery program, so it's just staff. And then we have a small what we call our seminar room that holds up to about 20 people, and a larger room that holds about 80 people or so for larger recovery meetings, but also is used in a lot of different ways. So the next tier is that membership tier. Have to be students. Members of our community can get recovery coaching. They can go on trips, attend events, and other kind of fun activities that tend to be pretty substantially subsidized. Typical thing we do is like recovery spring break. Usually the cost per person on that is about $100 for usually 4 or 5 nights, you know, including transportation and food and everything. So we use kind of donors to privately subsidize those trips so that there's not a cost barrier for folks. And then kind of the next tier up above membership is our Recovery Scholars Program. So students basically apply to be in the Scholars Program. This requires kind of a bigger commitment to their recovery. Students at this point need to be really able to articulate what they're doing for their recovery, and kind of have some real personal commitment to their recovery. It's a weekly, not for credit seminar. So we have about, depends on the semester, but 10 to 12 different sections of 8 to 12 people that are in the Recovery Scholars Program. And those are delivered hybrid. Most of them are hybrid. There's some that are in person only and some that are virtual only. And we actually serve not just VCU students. It's about 2/3 VCU students, and then 1/3 are students in recovery at other Virginia colleges and universities. And so those give people kind of a small group that they go through a whole semester with. So usually 8 to 12 people. They get a scholarship at the end of the semester if they haven't missed more than 3 sessions of the Recovery Scholars Program. And they can renew in the Scholars Program all the way through to graduation. So we'll have some folks that will do that 8 semesters. We've even had some PhD students that have participated in that program over a 5 or 6 year period. And they continue to be able to get scholarship funds based on their kind of attendance and participation. Right now we're typically 90 to 100 people in that program. It's kind of grown pretty steadily since we started in 2019. But it's based on kind of a best practice model from Texas Tech, which has kind of the largest collegiate recovery program in the country. So then the last kind of level or tier of services is our recovery housing program. We have a limited number of beds, typically 8 to 12 beds. It's kind of a pretty low level of care compared to a lot of recovery housing. So typically we ask that folks have at least 6 months of recovery before they're in that level of care, because it's just not as intense as like a treatment setting or something like that. And the restrictions are much less than a typical recovery house. And that is, you know, abstinence is required. People really have to opt into that. It tends to not work very well if people's parents are more interested in that for them than they are. There's no additional cost for that. It's part of just if somebody does housing on campus. But it is typically we can't add anybody mid-year. So it is a kind of a full year minimum commitment for folks, and but can be a great solution, especially when people are kind of coming back to school for the first time, you know, transferring schools, that sort of thing. It gives them an instant recovery environment. Students in that program are required to do coaching. They're required to do the Recovery Scholars Program, and there's some additional requirements in that program. So again, that's a more intensive space. So it's kind of our idea is that people can engage at the level they want to engage, and we don't want to force anybody into any particular service. Even in the housing program, if somebody decides mid-year, hey, this is not for me anymore, or they just are, you know, say they're using substances and they are not in a place to stop, or they're not willing to follow the kind of treatment recommendations of an outside provider, we will have them move to non-recovery housing. So we really want people to be proactively opting into housing.
Well, thank you for that comprehensive overview. You have a lot of services there. And that ties into my next question. How do students find out about your services? How do most students get referred? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a variety of referral sources. We certainly work closely with we are part of our counseling center, though we're not in the same physical location. So we get a lot of referrals from counseling services, from health services. We get a lot of academic advisor referrals. So We do a lot of recovery ally training on campus, which is a 3-hour training to support students in recovery. And the folks that take that training get a little sticker that says Recovery Ally on it. And so they tend to display that somewhere. And so it opens up conversations.
Mhm.
And then we try to have a presence on campus. So we have some outreach bikes. We serve free hot coffee off of a bike, and that's done by our student workers who are in recovery. And so that's an outreach tool. We also distribute naloxone, which is a drug that reverses opioid overdoses. And we actually have a bike to train and distribute naloxone. And so people find out about us through that. We also have a campus magazine, if you will, that is called the Stall Seat Journal. So it's in the bathrooms. And that is done by a different department, but we're frequently featured in that as an option for folks. So try to just kind of have a combination of having faculty and staff aware of what we do, but also kind of having regular events on campus that help people know what's going on.
Do you find that students come to VCU specifically for your program, or do most of them opt in and find out about it once they're there?
Yeah, so we have a lot of students that opt into come to VCU in part because we have really strong recovery support, and we have a really good reputation in the local recovery community. So people tend to get plugged in. And one of the nice things there is with the scholars program, even if another school is a better fit for folks in terms of what they're looking for academically, we will often be able to include them in the scholars program and some of the statewide events that we do. So people are often kind of hearing about us from word of mouth or that sort of thing and coming to VCU because we have we have pretty robust services.
Yeah, you do. It's very comprehensive. And then how about parents? How do you kind of navigate that process with parental involvement with students? Obviously they're in college and you don't have to, but how have you found best to collaborate with parents through this?
Yeah, so we're happy to kind of talk to parents anytime. Typically, our experience has been that folks have better success when students are kind of proactively reaching out to us. Sometimes with a parental nudge, which is totally fine. But if we find that if our primary relationship ends up with being like, if we're talking to the parent a lot more than we're talking to the student,
yeah,
it doesn't tend to work out that well. And so sometimes students, may need to kind of withdraw from school and get some more formal treatment. The students that tend to have more success, just like kind of getting into recovery while they're in school, are the students that kind of self-refer, either, from a campus source or that sort of thing, whereas like a lot of times the students that there's more parental involvement. Oftentimes those students kind of go to treatment and then kind of find us through treatment, or kind of are ready to engage with us after they've had some sort of formal treatment. So that, it's not always the case, but that tends to be, kind of the direction. We do have a virtual family support program that we're a part of the network for. It's not really run through VCU anymore, but there's a virtual family education program that is run by kind of a local recovery focused congregation called the Family Education Program. And so that meets Thursday nights virtually, and that's just open to anybody. And so family members often find that to be a nice source of support, especially as their loved ones are navigating early recovery.
Yeah, it's always helpful to have that group support of other people going through the same thing.
Yeah.
How do you, are there accommodations that students can request on campus when they're kind of working through recovery? How do you work with academic advisors and kind of helping them navigate the demands of their schoolwork while they're participating in your programs?
Yeah, so at VCU, the accessibility office is called the Student Accessibility and Educational Opportunity Office, or SAEO, SAEO. And they are wonderful to work with. So one of the accommodations that all of our student members get is they get early registration for classes. They actually don't have to go through SAO to get that. They just have to become members of Rams in Recovery. And what that allows is for people to kind of plan their course schedules around their kind of regular recovery meetings and therapy and that sort of thing. So that's a great accommodation for lots of people. When people, especially in their first couple of years of recovery, oftentimes there's additional accommodations that are really helpful, additional test time. Typically, if the issue is just primary substance use, like additional misses and that sort of thing in terms of class accommodations are generally not like the accommodations that are appropriate for folks. But other things in terms of incompletes and longer test time and study support and that sort of thing can, that can be kind of worked. They can work with SAO to kind of figure out what's appropriate there. Especially in people's first couple of years of recovery. And they've been great to work with. They can either get their kind of documentation through an outside provider, or we can provide documentation. If somebody is doing coaching with us, we can provide some documentation that says they're engaged in services and here's some of the challenges that are coming up. Generally that office has been awesome to work with. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It's wonderful. No, that's not always the case. Last question. Is there anything that you wish I would have asked you, or anything else you would like to share about your services and what you do there at VCU?
No, I think that, we're a really good place to be for students that are pretty serious about their doing, doing recovery work. There's a robust community. There's good folks to plug into. You get some exposure to kind of statewide and even some national kind of other students in recovery. We have a lot of folks that are kind of studying to be addictions counselors or counseling professionals. We have a lot of students that do their undergraduate and then they do their master's here in rehab counseling or social work, or even one of the PhD programs. Richmond is it's a cool place to be. It's, there's a lot of things, that are accessible about Richmond. There's a great kind of larger recovery community. So it's a really good place when students are kind of pretty self-motivated. We might not be the best school for someone that, certainly needs a smaller school or a smaller community. That is just may need some more direction. I think there's some schools out there that have really strong communities that are kind of in the 15 to 25 person range, and for some students that might feel kind of better, to have like a pretty small tight-knit community that's easier to plug into. Certainly some of our students are kind of overwhelmed when they come to their first community meeting and there's 35 or 40 people there. And so that's something to consider, about just like, does it feel like a fit? It's a city, it's, and everything is here, right? So, don't have capacity to kind of chase students around that are really struggling. So that's a factor.
Okay, well, that's great consideration to help students make that determination, right, about whether it's a good fit, what they're looking for. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And students and parents will be excited to learn about these services.